I'm here with Khalil Ferguson. He earned bachelor's degrees in international relations and economics. His studies have focused on how new market tax credits and opportunity zones affects economically sensitive populations. Currently sitting on the Measure U committee for the city of Sacramento, Khalil focuses on strategies for inclusive economic development. Specializing in budget analysis, fiscal policy analysis, Khalil analyzes the impacts of economic policies on communities who sit on the margin economic calculation while also ensuring they are included in development opportunities. Good afternoon, Khalil.
Good afternoon. Happy
How
to
you
be here.
been, man? How you been?
I'm great. I'm great. My spirit is well despite the circumstances, but we're able to
Yeah,
stay.
yeah, you're looking great, man. You're looking great. So how have you been, handling this COVID thing going on since, I guess, was it like March, mid-March or something?
March, yes, or so around March. Well, when COVID hit and of course
Mhm.
we're everyone in quarantine started, I was just reading a lot, and I was diving well into the book. I have a stack of books on socio-legal theory for Pan-African jurisprudence at the house right now, and a lot of books on customary law.
Mhm.
Um, reading, I think one book I have started was about the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act in 1998.
Mm.
That changed the scene for the banking system here in the U.S.
Mhm.
Up until the rebellion happened, I was reading a lot. I actually been getting back into my reading now that we have some more time to strategize. But within the past 2 weeks since the rebellion happened, I've been very tired from the organizing and the meetings and the keeping up with the readings and the strategy that our ancestors have given to us through their texts, through their revolutionary movements.
I know you read a lot, so for sure, you're doing some meditation, music.
No, not really. It's really been sleep, work, and read, and that's really been it, honestly.
Why are Black people more hard hit by the pandemic?
We are more hard hit by the pandemic as a result of, and I said this in another conversation I've had, that it can go be relegated to, everything can be relegated to our treatment in the United States since the transatlantic slave trade. I kind of focus on like how redlining during the 1930s, redlining, the lack of equity in housing that dilapidated our wealth, that has a multitude of consequences today. Redlining keeps us segregated in neighborhoods, but also didn't allow us to create wealth to afford healthcare.
Mhm.
And as a result of race, white supremacy, and redlining, and a lot of those things combined, we now have Black populations who have high rates of asthma, high rates of respiratory illness as a result of being
Mhm.
close to places like Chevron Refinery in Richmond, California. The city dump was, when a lot of people migrated north from the south during the Great Migration
Yeah.
towards, specifically in Richmond. Richmond was still segregated, so they could only
And
live.
that's where you're from, though, Richmond, right?
So they could only live in the northern part of Richmond, which is North Richmond, clearly. Um, but that is where we have a lot of commercial property. That is where the Chevron refinery, which is on fire every 2 to 3 years, and the city dump is, and that has a effect on the health. So on top of that, we have and within our culture, we eat a lot of food that causes diabetes, high cholesterol, and all that stuff. And these are all pre-existing conditions that affect COVID-19. So when we look at rates of COVID-19, we have lack of health care. Then we have these pre-existing conditions as a result of being redlined and allocated to these living situations. It's like it's set up for us to be disproportionately affected in that way.
Quite often, you hear people saying that, no, all Black, all lives matter. But we say this because, we feel like, uh, you know, uh, Black people have been brutalized. What say you on that?
Yes, it's really just
Because we know that all lives matter, right?
yes. I think if everything, we know the value of life, and that is, to an extent, that's the reason why we get placed in these circumstances, because we value everyone else so much that we don't see the problems that are affecting our own communities.
Mhm.
Um, and that's, more of a larger context. But if we look at what All Lives Matter is used for, it's used to deflect at the goals and intentions of what Black Lives Matter stands for.
Okay.
And the reason why we say Black Lives Matter, and even more so, All Lives Matter is usually just an equalization for Blue Lives Matter.
Mm.
Um, so it's really just a deflection. I don't even pay it any mind. We like to focus, everything is so Eurocentric and so white
Yeah.
centric. I ignore everything that even
Yeah.
takes away from our analysis and our perspective of being Afrocentric.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts on George Floyd's matter? Is racism actually escalating, or is because now we have technology, we can sort of kind of expose it every day, every minute?
We can expose it more. However, it's much more nuanced than that. Police brutality has been a problem. Them killing us in this fashion is something that has increased as a result of the military occupancy by the U.S. over the years since Reagan. Honestly, Reagan amended in 1986 the Military Cooperation with Civilian Law Enforcement Act, and that's when the police really started becoming more militarized, started getting not only training but weapons, military grade weapons from the military. And then on top of that, as the relationship kind of got closer, we're seeing more Israeli troops training U.S. forces, and they're taking more of the strategies from the occupation of the Middle East and implementing them domestically.
I heard that. Sorry to cut you. I want you to continue on that point, though. I heard that the tactics that they use, especially the neck, kneeling with neck, that's what the Israelis are using against the Palestinians.
Yes.
Okay.
And even simple things like teaching people the Macarena. They've done that in Iraq to kind of create a friendly relationship, make it seem seemingly amicable relationship with their occupation to children and civilians out there. This is a kind of counterinsurgency tactic that the U.S. military does to quell kind of insurgents and to quell their PR. Really, is all it really is.
We have seen some solidarity across the country, though, and even as we speak, Democrats in Congress are working on sweeping police reforms. Right? We have seen Jacksonville removing statues in the city, pretty much all of them, and across the world, we have seen statues of former colonists uprooted, sprayed with red blood paints, dragged in the mud, and some thrown in the water. I feel like something good is happening. Something good is brewing, brother. Do you think the events that followed Floyd's death, at least here in the U.S., will catapult us into justice under the banner of equality?
No. And that's based on our analysis and the text by African revolutionaries who have saw the different and who contextualize the different perspectives, the different principles, and the different phenomena that go on even during a revolutionary front. And we're seeing that today. So if we read Steve Biko, he says that the liberals usually co-opt the revolutionary movement, and liberals actually pose a bigger threat to the revolutionary movement than conservatives to an extent. And we're seeing that today with people who only want reform. We're seeing people who only who want to take pictures with the police, who really want to only reform the police to make the police stop killing us, as opposed to analyzing the root of the police being an extension of the imperialist force, which is why the police and the military go hand on hand, because of their usage to control the violence within the state. Studying international relations, if we look at the academic definition of a state, the formation of a state comes with a formation of a government who is legitimate, that people see as legitimate, but who also has control over the monopoly of violence in the state. And with the United States, the police are that arm of the control of violence. So in Frantz Fanon, what he will say is that the colonized bring the violence to the colonizer brings the violence to the colonized. So if we look at our situation as Africans who do not belong to this land, who were stolen from our land, we were introduced to a land that was created by violence, and they use violence to reinforce our subordination. So therefore, the only reaction that we can do is violence against the oppressors, and all the symbolic stuff is going to retain the social relations between us and the ruling class and the white supremacist class. No matter what. So we can have these symbolisms of removing the Confederate statues, but we know the way that the U.S. was created and stratified is along race, class, and gender. And no matter what, that hierarchy will be there unless we completely reorganize the social fabric of the state.
Okay, I know you answered this second question, this question that I'm about to ask you. Do you think the riots were necessary to sort of kind of? Yeah. Okay.
Even the progress that's been made with regards to reopening the cases, Minneapolis is doing what they're doing with regards to cutting the contracts. There's been various private entities in Minneapolis, what they're going on in the city of Los Angeles with regards to reinvestment. And that only gained people's attention, and people started coming out en masse after the people who were there took the rubber bullets, got the riot, got the tear gas, the looting happened, and it kept going. And then when the National Guard came in, people were like, okay, you're not going to keep using more violent institutions to, suppress people who are protesting violent institutions or protesting police violence. And then once the people came out and were, very peaceful, very photo woppy and all of that, which is part of a revolution, or no, I won't say part of a movement to an extent, but that didn't only get there, would not have gotten there if we didn't get reports of people getting hit by rubber bullets in the face, getting tear gas, being peaceful, and essentially just, being in that scene where to show the police are being violent. And that's one of the things that I would like to point out, is that one of the big parts of MLK's marches was that no matter how much they were being violent, and the March on Selma is a great contextualizing piece of history. That was so important because they were peacefully marching up, across the bridge towards that area, blocked by the police, and the police still attacked them and dragged them, beat them, did all that. So no matter what we see, the police are going to be the perpetuators of violence in this state because of how the police have been, what they're protected to do and what their intention is and what their role in this state is.
So Black contentions with law enforcement predate emancipation, right? And that's the control over slaves. Khalil, this hasn't changed because Black people are still treated like slaves.
Yes.
They still have a problem of, they still have a Negro problem. Can you talk to that, please?
Yes, and that, I'll just tell a story where that even came from, of my perception of that. Living in Sacramento, being in the county, the sheriff services the county of Sacramento. I was in front of my house one time driving home on a two-way street, and I usually just bust a U-turn to get into my parking spot on the street. But I saw the sheriff coming down. I don't know if it was legal or not. They'll pull you over for whatever. So I didn't want to take that chance. So I made a right into the neighborhood, got into somebody's driveway, instantly turned around. And as soon as I saw them come into the neighborhood, they turned around, and I'm like, yep, they're coming for me. So I got in my parking spot, and he pulled up behind me and asked me, hey, why are you avoiding me? I'm like, I don't want to be in the same situation I'm in now. And then he said, let me, ask me, first didn't even ask me for my license registration. He asked me if I was on probation or parole. And that to me kind of signified, do you have your papers? And if I was on probation or parole, legally, that means they have the right to search the car and find any reason to take you back to the prison because you belong to the state. And if you're in violation of any of that, then we can find any reason to take you back. And then the second interaction happened the second day where they asked me the same thing. And I realized it's just a matter of how they policed this neighborhood because of the income level of it. That just signified how, if during a slave patrol, if you didn't have a reason to be out, if you didn't have a letter from massa, then they were taking you back, and taking that bounty and taking you back to the plantation. Right.
You have long advocated for the reform of police use force. You must be frustrated because there hasn't been a lot of progress, regarding that, even though they're beginning to talk about it right now. Do you have hope on that?
I will say it's not that I don't have hope. I don't, we're battling something that's much more larger than us. For one, the police unions who have the money to influence politics, and Amos Wilson talks to us about how money buys politicians, which is why we need economic stability and an economic base to engage in politics here in the U.S. because of how the money runs it. I won't say I'm not hopeful, but there are multiple ways for us to combat, or to have this revolutionary front, while you have the people who are in the legislature who can, create legislation to do things like that and do all these campaigns to get incremental change. But you know how bureaucracy and policy, how long that takes. While we have that, and they're kind of they're battling and chipping away at the power structure with regards to the police. We have our revolutionary movements on the other hand, who are also being the antagonists, who are going up and being the class, the primary battle with the state. So I don't really believe much in just utilizing legislation to get where we want, because at the end of the day, if we look at the legal system, it's worked against us. And if we look at how the European encroachment of the legal system in Africa during colonialism and post-colonialism, physical colonialism, because we're still colonized even on the continent to an extent through neocolonialism. But they implemented their own law and infused their law with customary law through the traditions of the various tribes. They were able to rule over that governing law because it doesn't fit us as global Africans. We don't abide by the same legal structures and the same customs.
Some have said that if police institutions are defunded, you can take some of that money and invest it in our communities.
Yes. I mean, if we study economics, we know, some people will argue with me on this, but we know that crime is a derivative of poverty. You don't police these problems. The police aren't the solution to poverty. You don't police people who need, who are committing crime as means to live. How about you provide means to live, and you see a reduction in crime? Things like mental health, things like economic development and jobs, but being able for us to produce them ourselves. I don't want to increase our dependency or reliance on the state for us to live. We need to be able to do that ourselves, but we still need to alleviate these problems. And right now, we do not have en masse the capacity to be able to service all of our problems without the injection of capital from our city governments and from our state governments. But we still can't do that while we're still being policed. And if we look at, I would love to do an analysis or some kind of report on seeing how much GDP is being taken away or lost from communities through the prison pipeline system.
Wow.
Pipeline, like just think about it in that manner, like how much potential jobs and potential development for that community is being taken away by taking people out of there and placing them in, on modern day slave plantations.
You read a lot about our education system, and most of the time you reference the Sacramento and the Bay Area systems. How can the education system in inner cities bring equity rather than perpetuating the school to prison pipeline, as you mentioned in one of your writings? And you continue to say that this is actually a problem that precedes civil rights. He who feeds you controls you. Because here you were talking about what Thomas Sankara said, right?
Yes.
And how do you relate that to the white dominion over Black people in the U.S.?
It's a dependency relationship. And but Sankara was talking about if you look at domestically where your food comes from, it's not produced locally, and that's the epitome of neocolonialism. If you're not even producing the food that you're eating within your territory, then you're dependent on someone else to feed you. So he who feeds you controls you, and that's kind of what Nkrumah was talking about with neocolonialism, saying that we don't have any control over the economics within our own state, within our own communities. Therefore, we can't control the politics. And if we look at that's why the fight for self-determination is so important, because of that. We need to be able to take control over our own economics and politics within our own communities, within our own jurisdictions. And that's why the police are so much within our own communities, because we don't have the ability right now to police ourselves. Well, we do, but we're not organized enough to fulfill that, make sure that we can control our communities in a way that doesn't lead us to jail or take us to jail, or further increase our dependency on the judicial and the state systems.
From your book, Subservience, you write, historically and contemporary, the Democratic Party has been one of the largest impediments to substantial progression. Right?
I started with the 1900s. We know how the Democrats were the Republicans of back in the day. Democrats back in the day are what the Republicans would be now with regards to policy ideas. It's a lot more nuanced. But I started in the 1900s, and if you look at like the land, there was a land appropriation. I'm thinking of South Africa. There was a land act that was supposed to give land back to the recently enslaved Africans after the emancipation, after the Civil War. But yet, once Southern Democrats got back into power, and the Northern Army left and ceded, that land and politics was taken away from the Freedmen's Party and the Freedmen's Bureau and a lot of the Black people who had bought land, who had gotten into politics. We see a lot of Black politicians rise on Congress during that time, and all that power was taken back and given to the Democrats, as well as the land during that time. But then as we go down the timeline, we see how FDR New Deal reforms was largely to blame for redlining and reinforcing segregation. Although a lot of black voters became Democrat at that time because of those policies, that kind of reinforced with regards to subordination. Wealth wasn't created as a result of FDR's policies. Redlining and suburbanization happened under his policies that largely didn't benefit us and largely did not help us create the wealth we need to have our own communities. Then we go on. I think I go into, if we look at Jimmy Carter and his role in the international scene, I didn't put that in there, but that's the thing I need to talk about. We go into Bill Clinton and Joe Biden and their roles in the crime bill and mass incarceration. And then we go on to Barack Obama, who has been seen as this kind of black hope for us to lead change the wrong way. But Obama did mainly things for middle class black folks with regards to progression, Then in the Pan-African scene, with regards to the occupation of Africa, Obama bombed the Middle East and parts of Africa, Northern Africa, intensively, while also killing Gaddafi. And while there's,
and I think we'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I know Roosevelt was a president when Black people widely began a crossover, from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party in the 30s, right?
Yeah.
But in 1964, when the GOP nominated Barry Goldwater, a candidate who voted against the Civil Rights Act, majority of Blacks crossed. Has this crossover served African American positively?
It depends on what frame you look at. People will say that the integration was beneficial. Race relations have at least progressed. We don't have completely overt racism. But I think Donald Trump and his constituency will say different, or no, just looking at them, that epitomizes the fact that, race relations haven't changed really since the 60s. They just have, been hidden or become less overt. And that's the epitome of the Democratic Party. And that's why I don't really engage, and I don't like ascribe to any kind of political party, because both parties work to uphold the white supremacist structure. And with regards to Democrats, I say Democrats because I go back to what Malcolm X says. At least we know what we're getting when we're dealing with the Republicans and the conservatives. But when you deal with the Democrats and the liberals, they'll smile on your face but stab you in the back. And this is a matter of dealing with the two parties and the way that they operate and they uphold white supremacy here in the United States.
Okay. The three strikes. You talked about the three strikes bill that Biden and Bill Clinton introduced in the 90s, which actually exacerbated the incarceration of Black people in the U.S. What are those strikes? Can you talk a little bit about those strikes?
Yeah, the three strikes rule kind of also emanated off the at the scene. The political scene was coming off the tough on crime and war on drugs. Nixon, Reagan, they all talk about, the war on drugs and the war on crime. And then we have these Democrats and these moderate Democrats, for example, which Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, and Obama all aren't really, the most progressive. They're still sitting in the middle. They're still committed, as MLK said, to law and order as opposed to justice. So when you have the three strikes bill, we're also coming off the crack epidemic. And that leads into this disproportional sentencing for Black people here in the United States. So while you got your three strikes, if you essentially got three strikes, you're sentenced to life in prison. But that strike could come off as a possession of cocaine as opposed to crack. And crack was 5 times more of a sentence than was cocaine. But Black people were more likely to have crack than cocaine because of the alleged, detriment to society associated with crack as opposed to cocaine. I think was it the 10-to-1 rule or the 5-to-1 rule?
10-to-1, I think. Yeah. I believe that slaves, when they got here, they built this country, America. I think they've done a lot of work here.
Yes.
And, if it wasn't because of him, America will not be the America that we know.
Right.
So what are your thoughts, or what is your stance on reparations?
I feel like reparations will not happen here in the United States.
Okay.
It's too much of a bill. Politically and ideologically, the U.S. has to believe that it did a wrongdoing.
Okay.
The U.S. clearly does not believe it did a wrongdoing with regards to its occupation, its colonialism of the land, its slaughtering of the natives that were here, and then the enslaving of Africans. We see even in, if we look through our history of the missions that the Europeans took to Africa, they justified slavery, saying that slavery is okay because it was justified by the common rules of religion at that time. So they didn't see it as anything wrong at the time. So it will take for the U.S. to realize morally that that is wrong. Yet capitalism says that it's okay with regards to the U.S. view of capitalism because they say, feudalism and serfdom, slavery was just the gap between feudalism and the capitalism. That's their justification for that. So the U.S. theoretically, and within its history, will never admit that that's a wrongdoing. Therefore, reparations will never come because there wasn't anything done wrong. Reparations will come to an extent that we will address it. We will give you some kind of private investment, as Obama wanted to invest in Black communities to make sure Black communities are supported. But we're not doing any tangible things with regards to reparations from the United States.
And since you talked a little bit about Obama, you write that from global perspective, Obama perpetuated white supremacy even though he is an African American.
Yes.
You went on to talk about how he gravely participated in the global terror, which spiked the number of civilians casualties to 100 times.
Yes.
Can you unpack that for us, please?
What's actually funny is my first paper I wrote in the international relations program at Sac State was about how Obama was defying international law by hitting civilians mostly with his bombs. And now that we have the report, later on, the numbers have aggregated there as saying that if 90% of the time his bombs were dropped, they hit a civilian. And part of that, of course, we're in the Middle East, and we have our contentions with the Arabs with regards to African-Arab relations, but they still hit Northern Africa and occupied Somalia. And that's on the continent. And when he does that, now you're okay. You're having military as a black man attack other Africans. And that's where I'm like, you're working to uphold the U.S. as the global hegemony and not working towards deconstructing and decolonizing the United States and the world for the most part. So that's where we're like, if we look at what Obama stood for in a global political scene, he didn't do any favors for the motherland towards our liberation.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. A lot of people that I talk to, especially Africans, believe that Obama regrets or should regret his corroboration in the killing of Gaddafi. I think he should regret. Why should he regret, though? Was this the continuation of white supremacy?
He wrote an article saying the article title was "Obama regrets the killing of a Gaddafi." But if you read the article, he doesn't regret killing Gaddafi. He regrets not having a plan for Libya after killing Gaddafi. Oh. So it's like, look, and I'm like, that's the epitome of Obama upholding U.S. He wants to go and disturb and undermine the whether or not you agree with what Gaddafi was doing in entirety. The fact that he was going in to undermine the sovereignty of another government, another state, particularly to fund someone who has been CIA trained. Khalifa Hifter actually trained here in the 70s after he was exiled by Gaddafi for their relations in Chad. And he went to be trained by the CIA and then was redeployed back into Libya to train rebel groups to be anti-Gaddafi loyalists. So it's like Obama doing that and having his relations with that. This plan has been going on before even the Obama administration, and that's just the mindset of leadership here in the United States with regards to ensuring the U.S. remains a global hegemony. And that's why I feel like Obama will never regret it. He will regret Libya as being a failed state and that being under his watch. But if he would have had a plan to make sure Libya stayed within its prominence, I'm sure he would have had a problem with killing Gaddafi.
Biden raged against apartheid while the likes of Reagan supported the South African regime, the minority rule. In South Africa, what foreign and economic policy should he implement regarding Africa when he takes, if he takes over?
That's hard for me to say. I don't want any federal U.S. government, because I'm sure they're going to go and use the IMF to go and play some kind of neoliberal austerity measures to increase privatization and to promote consumption that will not benefit the rural and the peasantry areas of Africa, where a lot of the reserves are. That and it's messed up because the peasantry class, when the apartheid happened, was relegated to these. Their land was being encroached on. So kind of like the natives in the U.S., their land keeps getting taken by the state government, who was largely ran by people who do not look like them, which are usually children of the colonizers, not colonizers themselves, who have the relations to European and United States foreign businesses. So whoever gets in office, whoever wins his next election, to take the country, take the businesses out of Africa, out of South Africa. We here in the States need to support the EFF and Malema and what they're doing to get the land appropriation back to the farmers that it was taken away from, and ensure the peasantry can have and retain control over the land that was taken away from them. And it's rightfully so that they should have that self-determination and that land back from the colonizers.
So what do you think? You mentioned Malema. What do you think about Malema?
I haven't studied him enough in the past years. When the land appropriation argument and that started going, I was following that a lot, but I fell off and I focused my studies more on kind of a historical context. I know I'm reading an author who actually contextualized in a better way that's not Eurocentric about the Rwandan civil war, and it was not a genocide; it was a civil war with regards to the political relations and the cultural aspects between in East Africa. And he contextualized it a lot better. So just learning, decolonizing how I view and how I have viewed relations in Africa has actually been a primary step that I've been doing.
Yeah, I think he's a good guy. Why do you liken gentrification to neocolonialism, especially when you're talking about, Oak Park or the Bay Area? Can you talk to that?
Yeah, because in Nkrumah's definition of it says that essentially because we don't have any economic control, and we allow private investors and these businesses who are not from the area to come in and control our economies, we don't have any control over the politics. And you see that with gentrification. You see these private investors and these developers who come into our neighborhoods who have already been over policed, and the police are a tool of gentrification as well, because they work to actually they incarcerate and they target a lot of the people who commit the crimes in the neighborhood. Now the Black population decreases, we have to focus on different racial and social aspects. And you have a lot of, for one, you're taking away the GDP. So then you're taking away a lot of the jobs that can get reinvested to afford the homes, to buy the homes, or rent. It's kind of a secular kind of relationship. And then once you get that kind of phenomenon started, then you have the private developers who are like, hey, we have this land who was relatively close to either downtown or some sort of local metropolitan area like West Oakland and San Francisco. Once it's targeted by the police, you have dilapidated housing, you have reduced housing prices. Private developers who are heavily capitalized and come in and say, hey, public, city government, we have the capital, we can make this neighborhood lively again. We can, have a bunch of businesses here. And the city government was like, why not? Therefore, we don't have any say. With regards to the people, you have the people power who can come and protest against these developments, but that largely doesn't work. If we look at Oak Park and how North Oak Park has become gentrified in the span of 4 or 5 years.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Khalil Ferguson on our show today.
Thank you.
And he has written a book called Subservience. So where can they find your book, man? I know I got it from Amazon.
Yes. Amazon is one way you can get. I have, if you go to my website, Khalil J. Ferguson, it's my name, .com. I have them on there as well. I also have a list of sample articles that I've written and recent articles that I've written on my website as well with regards to COVID-19 and how it will affect gentrification as well.
Yes. That's my next question. Yeah. That's my next question. So do you believe COVID-19 will exacerbate or affect, gentrification?
Almost definitely. In the article I wrote, I say we're very insulated from the actual effects of what's going on, how this will affect the economics of the city. And City Council member Eric Guerra actually kind of reified this to an extent. He said that we don't know exactly how this will affect the housing market with regards to people not being able to buy, how people not having jobs are able to not afford rent, and that could affect, people not being able to pay their mortgages, who are the landlords, or people who don't have jobs not being able to pay their mortgages themselves, and we see a spike in foreclosure. We just don't know. With regards to Black businesses, we are already seeing, we know Black businesses have a hard time accessing capital in the first place. While the federal government and the city government were releasing economic relief funds, Black businesses had a very hard time accessing these funds. I believe ABC or NBC did a report on why, a report saying that Black businesses are not able to access these economic relief funds through the PPP loans, through a lot of these, economic relief stimulus funds. So if we're going on for a prolonged time where they're seeing little or minimal business and they happen to close, one of the earliest signs of gentrification is that the mom and pop shops, the family-owned stores begin to close, and they begin to be priced out by either chain restaurants or more local urban hippie kind of people who come in, who have the capital to come in and essentially redevelop the neighborhood. So I guess, that's just my prediction, but we'll see as it goes on. Instantly we really are to this impact.
I think that's how I understand it myself. So what do you think the urban development policies in cities across the U.S., particularly in Sacramento, help gentrification?
Well, urban development policies seek to attract any city government, and it's just the city governments, as a mayor, your primary duty is to ensure that the city remains stable, but actually has growth. So inherently, you want to attract businesses to an area is going to be is problematic, because you're wanting to attract outside developers, outside capital to come in and direct, I would call it in an international scene, foreign direct investment into a community. And once you start having that, like Thomas Sankara said, who feeds you controls you. So they're investing into the neighborhood. to develop their businesses, develop their condos or luxury apartments that people usually can't afford. So when you seek to attract the foreign investment into a neighborhood, you begin to lose your autonomy and control of that neighborhood.
So what do you think about, because I know when, Mayor, I know probably you don't want to talk about this, but that's okay if you don't want to talk about it. Do you remember when Mayor Johnson was in?
I don't remember, no, but I've done small studies and I have friends who were here and I have elders who were here saying that he helped exacerbate gentrification here in Oak Park, that area, or did little to promote Black-owned businesses to be able to grow and flourish in Oak Park under his mayorship. So that's just what I've heard, and I can see that given the relations between him being promoted and him having prominence in that one corner of Oak Park while the rest of Oak Park gets gentrified. It's pretty interesting, just to have a quick analysis like that.
Yeah. Well, let's tackle some of those issues next time. Yeah.
Most definitely.
The erosion of communal relations and displacement of low-income individuals are an afterthought when urban development policies are implemented to revitalize the community, right? Is that what transpired in Oak Park? But I guess you answered that already. Is that what transpired in Oak Park, North Oakland, and other Black communities?
On the surface level, yes. I'm sure it's much more nuanced, and it'd take a much deeper study to realize what really happened. But even looking at things like new market tax credits and what the state has their own new market tax credit. Obama did his own new market tax credits. Trump has done. The thing is, new market tax credit is a very neoliberal, private corporation leaning policy that seeks to attract, literally, and within the text it says it seeks to allow investors or outside investors to come in and invest and have tax deferments on their investments for up to 10 years. And if you hold it for 10 years and you pay no taxes on it. So it's like you're promoting, the loss of autonomy by the local neighborhood to invest in our own neighborhoods. And that usually is what happens with regards to the social and political economic relations. I call them the social material relations with regards to contracts and business dealings of that nature in Oak Park and neighborhoods that are being gentrified.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the opportunity zones.
Yes.
Can you explain why the idea of new market tax credits and the opportunity zones are propensities contributing to the growing gentrification? You touched on this a little bit, but I just want you to expound. You aligned this to the trickle-down economics, where private developers invest in disenfranchised communities, furthering displacement. Can you talk to that, please?
Yeah, so they will usually mark, and this is also why I kind of link these to colonialism, because they also draw borders around where opportunity zones are, or new market tax credits will apply. Kind of like, so if we basically, colonialism was based on the arbitrary drawing of boundaries for commercial needs between the European countries that wanted to scramble for Africa. So if you look at the drawing of boundaries for commercial needs, saying, hey, this land needs to be developed because this land is underdeveloped, we're going to draw a border around where this opportunity zone, this new market tax credit will apply. You can go and invest there, and we'll give you basically a subsidy of tax deferment for holding that land. And then that trickles down. Essentially, it was supposed to trickle down to us in the form of jobs. So you can actually produce any kind of wealth. And yet, if you're building a condo, if you're going to build a condo on that land for a luxury condo or high-end condo or apartments, are you going to hire a Black construction company to build that so the Black construction company can build their wealth and further their capacity? Or are you there's no really wealth being created when they do this, because the wealth is going to be retained by the investors. Therefore, all we're going to get is some maybe some jobs that pay, about, manager level service position, but there's no really wealth being created on the back end.
Yeah. How about the federal? Go ahead.
And then if we look at the disparities in education levels, they can easily get around that by, saying, okay, you have to hire these, Black, people in the community for a manager level position, but that manager level position requires a secondary education, which most Black people can't get because our schools are underfunded, because we don't have the resources in our own communities to send a lot of our children to these schools. So therefore, they have to leave the local economy themselves to even gain an education if they even have the ability to do so. We're already not serviced, in the position to be able to service these jobs, especially as more tech companies come to the city of Sacramento.
How about the federal programs and economic policies that led to the mass exodus of Black people out of Oakland and the mass migration of whites and Asians coming in or moving in.
So that,
So what socio-economic policies do you think? This is a two-part question.
yeah.
So what socio-economic policies do you think would serve Black people better? But you can just talk about the mass exodus of Black people moving out of Oakland and the migration of white folks coming into Oakland,
Yeah.
And the Asians.
Yeah. So the first part, that's really just a characteristic of gentrification. When you see these, a more middle class type of people begin to move into areas that were largely low income as a result of the government policies. That's why you'll see an exodus of people who will leave and go and find more affordable places to live. And that's just the fact that when you don't own the property in your neighborhood, you can be affected by government policies that raise that allow developers to come in and raise housing prices and therefore rents. And if you don't own the home you live in, then you can get priced out real easy.
Because I just want people to understand, because when I first got here, I used to live in Oakland I used to live in Oakland on 38 and Telegraph. That's like of Oakland.
Yeah.
That area used to be like black neighborhood. But if you go there right now,
it's not.
It's not.
No.
Sometimes people wonder, what happened? But these are the topics, these are the things that you're talking about right now. So I want people to understand these things,
It's their proximity to Silicon Valley, the jobs being produced by San Francisco. And we're even seeing people who will commute from Sacramento to San Francisco for some jobs. And that's just a matter of of economics and the city government not promoting workforce development. The city of Sacramento in particular not developing a workforce inclusive economic development initiatives that actually allow for the autonomy of some of these communities to develop their own businesses and develop their own business community, as opposed to allowing other investors come in and have a say-so in that. With regards to the Bay Area and why we're seeing this change in socioeconomic relations and trends is largely because of that. If we see like this proximity to these tech companies, but yet these tech companies are reinvesting in the communities to help Black youth get educated in tech like that. It may be a small group, but it's not enough for them to be able to matriculate into these jobs to create the wealth to be able to to retain their homes. But then you have literally predatory investors who come in and take advantage of the lack of financial literacy that our grandparents may or may not have, and will offer cash for these homes. Like $800,000 cash for these homes, knowing that they can flip that, and that home will be worth when they redevelop the neighborhood, be worth 1.2 to 1.3 million. Things like that we're seeing are happening in these neighborhoods as a result of these heavily capitalized people who have been in, let's say, even the tech field for a while. Now the tech field generates a lot of millionaires because of its value now, and how we're going into a much digitized economy, a much digitized world. Yet we still have a lot to do. The people who are already on the head of the curve have the capital to influence a lot of the externalities that are associated with these emerging markets. Well, and now tech is more of it's not an emerging market, it's a solidified market now, but it's still growing.
And so what are those socioeconomic measures or policies you would put in place to better serve
So with regards, it's multifaceted. So with regards to ensuring that we can we're able to benefit from this growing tech field, we would mandate, we would do what we can to implement the fact, reinvest the surplus profits or whatever profits they have into Black communities to educate our youth, but even our older folks whose jobs may not be as important as a result of the increasing reliance on tech. Because now another part we're seeing is that as tech increases, the need to not regulate, but be able to service these tech jobs and these these digitized jobs. Those jobs are being created, but yet we don't go into school for tech or STEM for the most part. There's a few people do, but largely we don't go, and we don't have the education in STEM or in STEM for these jobs. And these jobs are becoming heavily specialized. Healthcare is a growing field where the jobs are being very specialized, needing to be having specialized education, and yet we're not going into these fields that require that. So with regards to education needs to be have paths to be geared towards these markets. So like in Germany has a nationalized education system to where they have it to where you literally, once you go into a community college, you come out with your AA and you come out with a trade apprenticeship, and that's already geared. That guarantees you're getting hired with some trade corporation or some trade company, and you have that job solidified by going through a community college. And it's a program where you do that, and once you come out, you have a guaranteed job in that field. So if we can gear that to healthcare, let's say we have a healthcare workforce development pipelines where we put students who want to go into healthcare. Boom, when you come out, you'll have a job with this company. If we do it for tech, boom, you have a job. You have a job here. And on the way, you teach them entrepreneurial skills as well. So when they get there, they can have the job, but yet they're able to produce jobs and create businesses within our own communities, or even ways for us to get that education ourselves to develop our own businesses. Something of that nature where we can implement to where we can change the socioeconomic pipelines of us just going to college, not coming out with the jobs that we want, because the jobs for that economy aren't necessarily needed. Like there's demand for jobs, but it's just not in all the fields that we're going into.
Okay, cool. You are not only studying American and European economic and socio-political policies, but also decolonization of Africa.
Yes.
The current debt crisis and the strife of monocrop commodity markets are colonial inheritances, and still impeding the growth of African economies. Can you talk a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, and the first example to come to mind, and probably the biggest example we'll see that comes to mind, is Nigeria and the reliance on oil exports.
Yeah.
If international oil exports, international oil prices drop, or the demand for Nigerian oil decreases, then they'll see a financial crisis, because there's no other way for them to generate the economy or generate the money that they need. And on top of that, that's only benefiting the very top of the class, or the top of the social status. That's not even benefiting the people on the ground. So then if that were even to be reinvested for a people, I would still say you need to diversify your economy, because if you're using that surplus profits to take care of the people in Nigeria, you're only relying on one export to generate that money. And that's really just a matter of, Nigeria, oil is something that Nigeria has that, comparative advantage in. But if we look at other places who don't have comparative advantages in things that they produce, they are a matter of European influence from colonialism. Congo, for example, had a lot of rubber trees and a lot of ivory, and that's what Belgium won. I still believe that Congo still produces rubber to an extent, but they also have right now coltan and cobalt.
Yeah, Congo produces almost
everything, for the most part.
Element you can think about.
Everything in their land. But a lot of things that are exported, and even the matter of like producing just for export is a problem, because producing for export increases your dependency on another country, on what they need, on what their demand is, as opposed to producing to fit your people's needs. If you can boost consumption in the domestic economy, then you can produce and have a diverse portfolio of production to fit your economic needs. But if you're producing primarily for export, something I recently just learned is it's even more messed up, because when you produce everything for export, not only do you have the influences to export everywhere, but you have the infrastructure for your mining and your export transportation suited for export. So, for example, I studied, I think it was, what country in South America? It wasn't Chile. It was Bolivia, I believe, or Brazil, one of those. But basically, it's costly to restructure your infrastructure for oil export or kind of natural resource export when it's already been geared and invested in by private investors to be directed towards export. So you have your oil shipments and like your mining equipment, everything. It's geared to go towards a port as opposed to being geared to go towards a city to serve a city. So it's like then you have to restructure all your pipeline infrastructure, which is very costly and capital intensive, which you need private investors to come in. So it's messed up because it's kind of secular. You need the private investors to restructure your already existing export infrastructure, but yet you don't want private investors to come in, because when private investors come in, they control the politics and the economy. So it's like, how do you make these things happen with the current circumstances without losing your autonomy and legitimacy to your people as a government?
The proliferation of neoliberal ideas and augmentation of structural adjustment programs, the SEPs, right? Exacerbated economic conditions of the continent and how it deepened Africa's dependency on Western market.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you say something very short? Because I know we don't have a lot of time now.
That's fine. So when Reagan got in office, and Reagan is like what we consider the godfather of neoliberal economics. That's really just Reaganomics, supply side, privatization economics. And what Reagan and the IMF and Margaret Thatcher, what they believed in was that And while there were balance of payments problems that Africa had, a lot of the education was subsidized by the government. A lot of things, a lot of the benefits of society were paid for by the government. And they saw that as being inefficient. So the first thing they did was saying, if you want this loan to help develop your economy, you must reduce government spending. And they reduced government spending by a lot, which on the flip side of that created a lot of unemployment as a result of a lot of government officials. And while that had its own complexities and its own problems, that was what you just mass created unemployment by enforcing African governments to abide by your rules. But not only did they create unemployment, it opened up their markets for financial liberalization, which allowed U.S. banks to come in and finance a lot of the things. And we know what happens when U.S. banks finance a lot of this. And this is what Nkrumah was talking about, how you have foreign capital coming in and commandeering your economy. But then you also have U.S. and European businesses coming in and setting up shop and actually repatriating those profits back to Europe and back to the U.S. and not reinvesting them. And that's a big problem with having multinational corporations in your economy, is that they don't reinvest those surplus profits unless they're going into another investment for themselves. And if you look at their relations to China right now, to some extent, China is not necessarily doing that, but what they're doing is they're coming and setting up shop, and the profits will stay there, but they'll import their own domestic labor force and not hire from the domestic labor force of the country that they're residing in. So it's creating actually a lot of class conflict. And one of my friends just actually went to the Gambia to the analysis of how the Chinese finances are affecting the fishermen markets, and we're seeing a more of a capitalist agrarian class who benefit from Chinese investment, but you also see a peasantry class who is very traditional and have not gotten any investment from China, who are they're having class conflict because they're the ones who are losing their livelihood, because their livelihood was the one that was helping to ensure the tribe had food. But now they're not getting any finance or not getting any fish because they're being overfished as a result of the markets of the businesses, the entrepreneurs who are being financed by China. So we're having a lot of class conflict in that area right now as well.
Yeah.
Chinese relations on the continent.
That's cool. Good stuff. From Nkrumah's The Last Stage of Imperialism, he says the essence of neocolonialism is that the state which is subject to it is, in theory, independent and has all the outward trapping of international sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from outside.
Yes.
Do you think this is what is taking place right now, Khalil?
Yes, most definitely. Yes.
Okay.
If we interview, I would say, locals on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
in Ghana and other places of Africa where China is present, they do not like China's relations, but yet we see the common themes of the politicians and the ruling class who benefit from these, from the capitalist class, from the political the political class, if you want to call it that one. I do believe there is a political kind of capitalist class who has the power and benefits from having the relations to the access to capital, the foreign access to capital, contemporarily. But if we do our analysis, we know that these relations are here as a result of the same structures from colonial governors that were here and were not reformed or abolished at all, upon decolonization.
Yeah. Now, I was going to ask you about China because I know China is like everywhere in Africa right now, but I think you touched a little bit on that. That's pretty much colonialism at its best right now. If Joe Biden wins,
yeah,
why is it important for him to pick a black woman?
I can't really speak.
Do you think he should? Do you think he should pick a black woman as a vice president?
I mean, for what? I think doing that gives us the same signal that Obama tried to give us, that he's the one that he's not racist, which he clearly is. He's what Malcolm X would call a liberal, one who smiles in your face and stabs you in the back. It would be symbolic. It wouldn't be anything meaningful, and it would be, in my opinion, to give us hope that we can strive to be the vice president of the United States, and that he's not really like Trump because he actually cares about black people because he has a black woman VP. It would be all for public relations and not actually progress. And this is why I say Democrats are a large impediment to black progression, because they do symbolic things like that, like putting a black woman as VP, as opposed to actually listening to more radical voices and having more radical people in power, because no matter what, they're going to be subject to.
Would you mind if he selected Condoleezza Rice?
Oh no, I don't see that. See, I
know you spoke against Kamala Harris. Especially dealing with the disenfranchising of Black people in regard to the prison complex.
Yes.
So I don't know.
And this is what we mean by even how Democrats work against us. We have Black people who work as, work up to the Democratic Party, but they work up by being a moderate or a centrist. And a lot of their policies work against actual Black progression, like our truancy policy. Like, why are we criminalizing parents and students for children missing school? While I understand the intent, it's the impact. Like, why are we using jail and the police? We're using these institutions of colonial control in our communities to reinforce our problem, to address socioeconomic problems. Like, that is just a complete, abhorrent mindset and a way to think. And that's just to tell you, the matter of decolonization that needs to be done with regards to ensuring our communities stay safe. Because using the police and the judicial system and the prison system for any socioeconomic problem in our community is a double negative. It's just going to reinforce negative tropes.
One last question. What are your thoughts on President Trump and how he's handling the economy during this COVID-19 and the civil unrest?
Trump's handling like any other conservative, further right conservative president would. They care about capitalism. They care about not letting China become a global hegemony. If you look at his presidency from the start, he immediately began attacking China because China is becoming a superpower economically and politically. Already, conservatives who love capitalism hate communism, so naturally China's already an attack. If you've been following some of the things between China and the U.S. as a result of COVID, the U.S. pulled out of the WHO agreement because they were siding more with China, and China was saying that the U.S. was the creator of the coronavirus. And you have two state-ran propaganda, state news cycles blaming each other. China's news cycle is blaming the U.S. while the U.S. news cycle is blaming China. And these are how states, play their games in a geopolitical kind of scene. Of course, now domestically, we see that they want to, they see a interruption in capitalism as a threat to the United States because the U.S. is built on capitalism and the U.S. loves capitalism. And if if capitalism falls, then communism takes over in the U.S.'s eyes. So it doesn't care about how many people die. They would just want to get the economy back opened up and resume business as normal to ensure the U.S. stays as great as Trump says it was. With regard to the civil unrest, we know that the police, the U.S. is a police state, and they're gonna, they're gonna use the police to reinforce law and order. It's not like Obama didn't do it. Obama called the protesters in Baltimore, Missouri thugs. So it's just like natural for any U.S. leader to utilize the police and or the military if need be to regain order, because the U.S. relies on the military and the police domestically and globally to retain order. So it's really of no surprise if we do our research and read our history of how the U.S. really operates, honestly. So it's expected, honestly.
Your last thought?
That was my last thought. That's the most recent trend. Think about how the U.S. utilizes the police and military to pursue their agendas. Oh, so I will say a last thought. About 8 months ago, and this is how U.S. news propaganda works. I already saw it happening. The United Nations praised the president of Bolivia, the former president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, for his socialist model of economic growth for the past 13 years. They've had a growing middle class. They had a very well-off economy using a socialist model of wealth redistribution. Once that happened, I knew the U.S. was going to start calling them a communist party and an enemy. And 3 months later, Trump called him an enemy and a threat to U.S. and that they were communist and all of that, stuff with regards to communism versus capitalism. Within the next 3 months, we saw a coup happen, and they said that his election was fraudulent and that the people didn't want him, and he was sent to exile. And then a leader who was backed by the United States assumed the presidency. Last week, the New York Times posted an article saying that, oh yeah, we didn't, if we look back at Bolivia, there was no fraud, nothing fraudulent happened, and Evo Morales was rightfully so elected to be the president. But yet, Evo Morales is now seeking asylum from his own government in Mexico. I think he's actually in Nicaragua now. So it's a matter of how the U.S. state propaganda works to, and this is the kind of enemy we're dealing with. Not they have the power to, fund and cause regime change in other countries. So this things we have to be worried about, and this is why when I see people saying Nkrumah was a dictator, you have the U.S. perspective of it, because the U.S. will naturally present its enemies as dictators and people who are not, and people who are not for the people, when it's really the complete opposite way around. And the U.S. is doing it to ensure that they can retain a global superpower.
Ladies and gentlemen, Khalil Ferguson.
Thank you so much.